from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, Psychedelic and Dissociative Drugs. Highlights: psychedelic and dissociative drugs can temporarily alter a person's mood, thoughts, and perceptions. Among other health effects and safety concerns, people who use these substances report feeling strong emotions, ranging from bliss to fear, and experiencing vast changes in how they perceive reality. In recent years, there has been growing research interest in the potential of psychedelic and dissociative drugs to treat medical conditions, including mental health disorders. An increasing number of people are also taking these drugs outside of medical setting for recreation, to improve well-being, or for spiritual or self-exploration. NIDA supports and conducts research to better understand the health effects of psychedelic and dissociative drugs, and to learn whether some of these drugs may help treat substance use disorders in medical settings. What are psychedelic and dissociative drugs? Psychedelic and dissociative drugs can temporarily alter a person's mood, thoughts, and perceptions of reality. Footnote 1. Among other health effects and safety concerns, people who use psychedelic and dissociative drugs report feeling strong emotions, ranging from intense happiness and a feeling of connectedness to fear, anxiety, and confusion. Footnote 2 and footnote 3. People who use these drugs also report experiencing intense or distorted visions or sensations. Footnote 1. Many psychedelic drugs derive from plants and fungi, and some have been used for thousands of years in traditional or religious rituals. Some psychedelic and dissociative drugs are also synthetic, lab-made. Footnote 2. People report using psychedelic and dissociative drugs for a variety of reasons, including seeking new fun, healing, or spiritual experiences. Footnote 1 and footnote 3. NIDA conducts and supports research on psychedelic and dissociative drugs to help inform policies and health decisions around their use. Researchers are also studying whether some of these substances may be effective treatments for mental health disorders, including addiction when administered in clinical setting. Footnote 4 and footnote 5. While researchers debate how to describe and classify psychedelic and dissociative drugs and other drugs with similar properties, they generally group these drugs according to how they work in the brain. Footnote 3. Some people use the term, quote, hallucinogens, end quote, to refer to all or some psychedelic and dissociative drugs. Psychedelic drugs. Drugs that primarily influence the way the brain processes the chemical serotonin. They can bring on vivid visions and affect the person's sense of self. Footnote 2. Includes psilocybin, LSD, DMT, mescaline, NBOMs. Dissociative drugs. Drugs that primarily affect how the brain processes the chemical glutamate. These drugs can make people feel disconnected from their body and environment. Footnote 6. Includes ketamine and PCP. Other. Drugs such as MDMA. Footnote 7. Ibogaine,
smoking.
Footnote 8, and salvia, footnote 9, affect a variety of brain functions to cause psychedelic and/or dissociative effects. All of these substances have mind-altering properties with the potential to cause changes in thought processes, mood, and perceptions of reality. Footnote 7, footnote 8, footnote 9, and footnote 3. Psychedelic drugs, also called, quote, classic psychedelics, end quote, or, quote, psychedelics, end quote, include psilocybin and LSD, mainly interact with specific receptors, which are molecular structures in the brain, known as 5-hydroxytryptamine 5-HT2A receptors. These are targets for the neurotransmitter, chemical messenger, serotonin. At certain doses, psychedelics may bring on vivid visions or sensations, alter a person's sense of self, and promote feelings of insightfulness or connection. Footnote 10. Dissociative drugs, including ketamine and PCP, block the action of N-methyl D-aspartate, NMDA, receptors. These are parts of the brain system for transporting glutamate, another neurotransmitter. While dissociative drugs can alter perception, they also typically make people feel disconnected from their body and environment. Footnote 6. Other drugs, such as MDMA, ibogaine, and salvia, work on a variety of brain functions to cause psychedelic or dissociative effects. For more information, see, quote, How do psychedelics and dissociative drugs work in the brain? End quote. And that is the next section. NIDA supports and conducts research on the short and long-term health effects of psychedelic and dissociative drugs to better inform health decisions and policies related to their use. While research is ongoing, scientific studies have revealed important information about how these drugs work. Effects vary widely. Effects of psychedelic and dissociative drugs may be difficult to predict and depend on many factors. These include the amount taken and potency, concentration and strength, as well as a person's unique biology, age, sex, personality, mood, expectations, mindset, commonly called, quote, set, end quote, and environment, or, quote, setting, end quote. Footnote 3 and footnote 11. Using psychedelic and dissociative drugs that contain contaminants or using them in a combination with other substances may also produce effects not associated with using these drugs alone. Footnote 12. Psychedelic and dissociative drugs temporarily alter thought patterns, mood, and perceptions of reality. People who use these substances report feeling stronger emotions, ranging from intense happiness and a feeling of connectedness to fear, anxiety, and confusion. Footnote 1, footnote 3. Many people who use psychedelic drugs, such as psilocybin and LSD, report seeing vibrant shapes, colors, and scenes, and reliving vivid memories. Footnote 10. People who use dissociative drugs, such as ketamine and PCP, describe experiencing distorted vision and hearing. Footnote 6. Dissociative drugs can make people feel, quote, detached, end quote. Many people who use dissociative drugs report feeling as though they are floating or disconnected from their body. Footnote 13. People may experience adverse health effects. Physical side effects of these substances, such as headache, nausea, or changes in heart rate, are generally not life-threatening. Footnote 14. However, illicitly manufactured or processed drugs may be contaminated with colorless and odorless fentanyl or other dangerous substances that can cause serious adverse effects, including overdose and death. Footnote 15. Psychedelic or dissociative drugs may also produce adverse or debilitating psychological effects, such as fear and anxiety. Footnote 3 and footnote 16. Research is ongoing to better understand short and long-term health effects of psychedelic and dissociative drugs. For more information, see, quote, "Are psychedelic and dissociative drugs safe?" End quote. Using psychedelic and dissociative drugs have been linked to dangerous behavior and injuries. People using these drugs may have impaired thought processes and perceptions that cause them to behave in unusual and sometimes dangerous ways. This may lead to injuries and other safety issues, particularly if there is not another individual present who can help prevent or respond to an emergency. Footnote 14. For more information, see, quote, "Are psychedelic and dissociative drugs safe?" End quote. Next section. How do psychedelic and dissociative drugs work in the brain? More studies are needed to better understand how psychedelic and dissociative drugs work, while researchers debate how to describe these drugs and how specific drugs should be classified. They generally group them according to what is known about how they work in the brain. Better understanding these mechanisms is an active area of NIDA-funded research. This basic research plays an important role in identifying their health effects and potential therapeutic uses. Although research is ongoing, studies suggest psychedelic drugs such as psilocybin, LSD, and DMT primarily affect 5-HT2A receptors in the brain, which ordinarily are activated by the neurotransmitter chemical messenger serotonin. Footnote 10. Research suggests that the most prominent psychedelic effects stem from activity in the brain's prefrontal cortex, an area involved in mood, cognition, and perception. Footnote 17 and footnote 18. Psychedelic drugs also temporarily disrupt communication between different brain regions, including the regions collectively known as the default mode network, DMN. The DMN is most active during brain activity that's related to self-awareness, such as reflecting on past events or making plans. Footnote 19. This may account for why psychedelic drugs can make a person's thoughts less self-centered and more expansive, promoting a sense of connectedness with others and the world. Footnote 10. And just to pause, I'm going to read the note underneath this NIDA image. I'll briefly show it for the video. It's 3 chemical compounds the drugs. One for psilocybin, the other is LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, and the last one is DMT, N and dimethyltryptamine. Top left, 2D chemical structure depiction of psilocybin. Top right, I already read that. Actually, I already described it, so I don't need to go through that again. So, proceeding with the reading. Dissociative drugs, such as ketamine and PCP, also affect the balance of certain chemicals in the brain. Footnote 6. Some of these changes lead to altered perception, as well as feelings of being disconnected from the body or environment. Footnote 20. Ketamine and PCP disrupt the actions of the brain chemical glutamate, a type of receptor called the N-methyl-D-aspartate, NMDA receptor. Footnote 6. Glutamate plays a major role in learning and memory, emotion, and the perception of pain. Footnote 7. Researchers are also investigating other drugs, sometimes classified as psychedelic and dissociative drugs, such as MDMA, and the way they work in the brain. MDMA stimulates the brain to release serotonin and weakly activates serotonin receptors in the brain, producing some mind-altering effects associated with psychedelic drugs. MDMA also increases activity of other neurotransmitters such as dopamine and norepinephrine, which are involved in mood and attention. Footnote 7. Other drugs that produce effects associated with psychedelic and dissociative drugs work differently. For example, salvia activates kappa opioid receptors in the brain. Footnote 21. While ibogaine affects a variety of brain receptors. Footnote 8. I'm going to pause the reading and go to the images. These are two more chemical structures for the two drugs. On the left is ketamine, and on the right is PCP, which is also called phencyclidine. And then the image on the bottom, diagram for the chemical structure for MDMA, 3,4-methyl N-dioxymethamphetamine. Next section. How is NIDA advancing research on psychedelic and dissociative drugs? NIDA conducts and supports research on psychedelic and dissociative drugs to help inform health decisions and policies related to their use. This research includes efforts to better understand the health effects of psychedelic and dissociative drugs, how chemicals in or similar to these drugs work in the brain, and whether they may be able to treat substance use disorders and other conditions. NIDA also funds research on how and why people use these substances. In June 2022, NIDA's Office of Translational Initiatives and Program Innovations also announced a new program to support small businesses to develop psychedelic-based therapies for substance use disorders. Along with other agencies, NIDA also supports major coordination efforts in this evolving field, such as the 2022 Psychedelic as Therapeutics workshop, co-sponsored by NIDA-funded projects related to psychedelic and dissociative drugs, and learn more about related clinical trials. Next section. Why do people use psychedelic and dissociative drugs? People report using psychedelic and dissociative drugs for a variety of reasons. People may use them for their mind and mood altering effects, for recreation, or to have an emotional or spiritual experience. Individuals also report using these drugs in the hopes of improving their mental health or well-being, or easing pain or stress, but more research is needed to determine their effectiveness for these purposes. Footnote 1, Footnote 3, and Footnote 22. Some psychedelic drugs are derived from plants and fungi that have a long history of use in many different cultures around the world. Footnote 23. Aztec shamans used psilocybin in healing rituals, and some Native American tribes used peyote as long ago as 5700 BC in religious ceremonies. Footnote 24. References to psychedelic drugs have been found in ancient texts from India and Greece. Footnote 2. More recently, researchers are exploring the use of psychedelic and dissociative drugs in medical settings, as treatments for substance use disorders and for other mental health disorders, such as depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Footnote 4 and Footnote 25. Next section. Are psychedelic and dissociative drugs safe? While more research is needed, the reported incidence of serious adverse effects from professionally supervised use of specific psychedelic and dissociative drugs, such as in clinical trials, is relatively low. Footnote 2, Footnote 10, Footnote 11, and Footnote 26. However, many past clinical studies on these drugs have not adequately assessed or reported on adverse effects. Footnote 27. Most people who report using psychedelic and dissociative drugs do so outside of medical or research setting. Footnote 1, Footnote 28. While further research is also needed to better understand the health and safety impacts of typical use of these drugs, some serious adverse effects and safety issues have been identified. Footnote 14, Footnote 27. Effects vary widely. Effects of psychedelic and dissociative drugs may be difficult to predict and depend on many factors. These include the amount taken and potency, concentration, and strength, as well as a person's age, unique biology, sex, personality, history of drug use, mood, expectations, mindset, and surroundings, sometimes called, quote, set and setting, end quote. Footnote 3, Footnote 10, and Footnote 11. Using psychedelic and dissociative drugs that contain contaminants or using them in combination with other substances may also produce effects not associated with using these drugs alone. Footnote 12, Footnote 13, and Footnote 15. Short-term physical side effects are typically mild or moderate, but may require professional care. People who take psychedelic or dissociative drugs may experience short-term side effects such as a headache, abdominal pain, nausea, or vomiting, high blood pressure, rapid heartbeat, trembling, and diarrhea. Footnote 4 and footnote 29. These are typically mild or moderate but may require medical care. Footnote 30. Importantly, reported cases of side effects likely represent only a very small number of people who use psychedelic or dissociative drugs, and most people who use these drugs do not seek emergency services. However, related data can provide insights on the side effects that may lead people to seek help. For example, according to U.S. Poison Control Hotline data from 2000 to 2016, the most common negative short-term effects experienced by people who called in about using LSD and psilocybin were agitation, rapid heartbeat, pupil dilation, confusion, and vomiting. An analysis of these data found about 17% of these callers, 600 people, who had used LSD, and 6% of callers, 363 people, who had used psilocybin mushrooms, were admitted to critical care. Footnote 31. Adverse reactions include fear and anxiety. People may also feel extreme emotions, such as fear, confusion, or panic. These challenging experiences are also known as having a, quote, bad trip, end quote. Footnote 32. Research on the extent to which such experiences occur and their impact on health is limited, in part because definitions and reporting of these experiences vary. Using psychedelic and dissociative drugs has been linked to dangerous behavior and injuries. People using these drugs may have impaired thought processes and perception that causes them to behave in unusual or dangerous ways. This may lead to injuries and other safety issues, particularly if there is no one else present who can help prevent or respond to an emergency. Footnote 14. In a survey of almost 2,000 people who took psilocybin outside of a medical setting and had a challenging experience, 11% said they had put themselves or others at risk of harm. Footnote 33. More research is needed to better understand the impact of psychedelic and dissociative drugs on driving, operating heavy machinery, or performing other tasks that could be dangerous if impaired. Emerging evidence suggests certain psychedelic and dissociative drugs may contain dangerous adulterants. For more information, see, quote, "Can psychedelic and dissociative drugs be adulterated with fentanyl and other dangerous contaminants?" End quote. Fatal overdoses and serious adverse effects are rarely associated with typical use of commonly used psychedelic and dissociative drugs. Footnote 14, footnote 34, and footnote 35. A 2004 analysis of multiple studies estimated that psilocybin and LSD both have a safety ratio of 1,000, meaning that the lethal dose of either drug is about 1,000 times larger than a person would typically take for a non-medical use. Footnote 36. However, some psychedelic and dissociative drugs including NBOMs. Footnote 37, footnote 38, ibogaine, footnote 39, and PCP, footnote 40, have been associated with a small number of reported deaths and serious adverse health effects. Though more research is needed, evidence to date shows that fatal overdoses involving these substances are typically associated with taking very high doses or using combinations of drugs, particularly combining these substances with alcohol or being placed in excessive physical restraints while displaying unsafe behavior. Footnote 16. More research is needed to understand to what extent certain psychedelic and dissociative drugs may be mixed with contaminants, such as fentanyl, that may cause an overdose. For more information, see, quote, "Can psychedelic or dissociative drugs be adulterated with fentanyl and other dangerous contaminants?" End quote. Drug interactions may influence effects. Though more study in this area is needed and reported cases are exceedingly rare, some researchers suspect psychedelic drugs may interact with other drugs or medications a person has taken, including prescription medicines that also increase levels of the hormone serotonin in the brain. Too much serotonin in the brain is called serotonin toxicity or serotonin syndrome. Symptoms are typically mild but can be life-threatening in rare cases. Footnote 41, footnote 42. Use of some psychedelics and dissociative drugs rarely causes a condition called hallucinogen persisting perception disorder, HPPD. Some people report recurrently perceiving the same images or scenes and having the same mood changes they experienced when they were under the influence of a psychedelic or dissociative drug sometime in the past. These perceptions, or quote, flashbacks, end quote, are typically mild and brief, lasting for seconds or minutes, and occurring within a week of taking a substance. Footnote 43. However, people with HPPD report that these episodes last longer and can reoccur even years after an experience with a substance, causing distress and other problems that impact their lives. Footnote 44, footnote 45. Research on HPPD so far is limited and has relied mainly on self-reports on types and doses of the drugs believed to have caused these symptoms. More research is needed to assess how and why HPPD occurs and to have ways to help prevent and treat it. Some psychedelic and dissociative drugs have been associated with specific long-term health problems. Research shows that long-term use of ketamine may cause ketamine-induced uropathy, a treatable but potentially serious condition that causes symptoms similar to those of a urinary tract infection. Footnote 46. Limited research also suggests using MDMA, considered by some to have psychedelic properties, may be associated with mild or moderate heart valve disease, in which one or more of the four valves controlling blood flow from the heart do not function normally. Footnote 47. In an analysis of studies conducted from 2015 to 2020, ibogaine use was associated with long QT syndrome, in which the electric impulses that control heartbeats function irregularly. Footnote 48. Research on long-term medical health effects of psychedelics and dissociative drugs is ongoing. More research is needed to better understand the long-term impacts of psychedelic and dissociative drugs on mental health. Mental health complications from psychedelic and dissociative drugs are currently extremely rare in clinical research settings, in part because these studies are highly controlled and participants are screened for existing mental illnesses. Footnote 32. For more information, see, quote, "What is the relationship between psychedelic and dissociative drugs and mental illness," end quote. Next section. Can psychedelic and dissociative drugs be used as medicine? The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, has approved the ketamine-derived esketamine under the brand name Spravato as a treatment for severe depression in patients who do not respond to other treatments. Footnote 49. The FDA has also granted breakthrough therapy designation for 2 formulations of psilocybin being studied as potential medical treatments for depression. NIDA supports and conducts research to learn whether some of these drugs may help treat substance use disorders in medical settings. Next section. What is the relationship between psychedelic and dissociative drugs and mental illness? While scientists are still studying their effects, research suggests that some psychedelic and dissociative drugs may promote positive changes in thinking and mood. Footnote 3. Researchers have suggested that these effects, including changes in brain functions that promote openness to new thoughts and experiences, may be valuable for supplementing mental health treatment. Footnote 50. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, has approved the ketamine derivative, esketamine, under the brand name Spravato, as a treatment for severe depression in patients who do not respond to other treatments. The FDA has also granted breakthrough therapy designation for 2 formulations of psilocybin being studied as potential medical treatments for depression. While short-term positive and negative mood changes are common with psychedelics and dissociative drugs, more research is needed to better understand the long-term effects these substances may have on mental health. There is some evidence that psychedelic drugs may bring about or trigger schizophrenia-like illness in people with predisposing factors, but little evidence that they cause long-term psychiatric problems for most people. In a 1966 study where people with pre-existing psychoses were given LSD, 3 of 65 participants experienced persistent worsening of their psychiatric symptoms, lasting 3 to 8 months. Footnote 51. In modern psychedelic research, as a precaution, participants with previously diagnosed psychoses or bipolar disorder and sometimes other mental illnesses are excluded from participation under these conditions. The risk of psychoses or suicide among people who participate in research on psychedelic drugs or who receive them as medication is extremely low. Footnote 52. An analysis of 34 clinical studies of LSD, psilocybin, or ayahuasca, published from 2006 to 2020 and involving 549 participants, found no evidence of long-term adverse effects. Footnote 26. However, poor mental health outcomes may be more likely outside of clinical use. Footnote 14. Research suggests, though, that the dissociative drugs, PCP, footnote 41, and ketamine, footnote 53, can make symptoms worse in people who have schizophrenia and can cause short-term episodes of psychosis, in which a person experiences hallucinations and delusions, and has trouble experiencing what is real and what is not. PCP can also cause psychosis that persists for days to weeks. Footnote 54. While it is not clear whether ketamine raises the risk of long-term psychosis, people who engage in regular recreational use of ketamine are more likely to experience delusions, even after weeks of abstinence. Footnote 55. Animal studies show that long-term use of PCP or ketamine can cause brain changes resembling those seen in people with schizophrenia. Footnote 56. One analysis found higher rates of suicide ideation, thinking about, considering, or planning suicide, but not attempted or completed suicide. In people who took esketamine, a ketamine derivative, compared to venlafaxine, an antidepressant medication. Footnote 57. In another analysis of 25 studies, medically unsupervised ketamine use was associated with related substance use disorder symptoms, memory loss, depression, and anxiety. Footnote 58. Can psychedelic and dissociative drugs be adulterated with fentanyl and other dangerous contaminants? That's the next section. Many illicitly manufactured or processed drugs are increasingly found to contain contaminants that produce effects, including overdose and death, not associated with the substance or amount of substance a person intended to take. Footnote 28 and footnote 59. Adulteration of heroin, cocaine, and other drugs with highly potent fentanyl and related substances is a major contributor to rising drug overdose deaths. Footnote 60. Because fentanyl and related substances are colorless and odorless, they are difficult to detect without chemical testing. This means adulteration of psychedelic and dissociative drugs with fentanyl and similar compounds is possible, but more research is needed to understand to what extent this occurs. Some organizations are using harm reduction practices to help avoid drug overdose deaths related to possible adulteration of certain psychedelic and dissociative drugs, particularly those taken in pill, powder, or liquid form. Footnote 15. How do psychedelic and dissociative drugs affect pregnancy? The effects of psychedelic and dissociative drugs during pregnancy are not well understood, as data are limited. PCP use during pregnancy has been linked to a range of congenital abnormalities in an infant's heart, lung, urinary, cardiovascular, respiratory, urinary, and musculoskeletal systems. Footnote 61. Some laboratory and epidemiological studies suggest MDMA, considered by some to have psychedelic properties, may cause motor delays and congenital abnormalities, particularly heart defects, in infants exposed to it during pregnancy. Footnote 62 and footnote 63. Are psychedelic and dissociative drugs addictive? Can people experience withdrawal? That is the next section. To be diagnosed with a substance use disorder, a person must meet specific diagnostic criteria for continued substance use despite negative consequences. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, DSM-5, a reference text professionals use to diagnose substance use disorders and other psychiatric disorders, includes diagnosis of phencyclidine PCP use disorder and, quote, other hallucinogen use disorder, end quote. Footnote 64 and footnote 65, but does not include substance use disorder diagnosis related to other specific psychedelic and dissociative drugs. Limited research suggests that use of psychedelic drugs such as psilocybin and LSD does not typically lead to addiction. Footnote 35. Researchers think that one reason may be because people commonly experience unpleasant side effects when taking these substances, including headaches and nausea, which reduces their desire to take them again. Footnote 66. A small laboratory study published on psilocybin, DMT, and mescaline suggested that these psychedelic drugs are, quote, weakly reinforcing, end quote, indicating their use is not likely to lead to a substance use disorder. Footnote 67. However, some evidence suggests people may quickly develop a tolerance to psychedelic drugs, meaning they must keep taking more of a drug to experience the same level of effects. Footnote 24. While more research is needed, laboratory research and a few human studies suggest that using the dissociative drug ketamine outside of a clinical setting can lead to cravings as well as symptoms of withdrawal. Footnote 68. NIDA conducts and supports research to better understand how often and to what extent people experience tolerance, withdrawal, and other substance use disorder symptoms related to the use of psychedelic and dissociative drugs. Next section. What is the scope of psychedelic and dissociative drug use in the United States? Information on the use of psychedelic and dissociative drugs is collected by several national surveys. These surveys use the terms, quote, hallucinogen and quote, hallucinogen use disorder, end quote, and data from those surveys are reported below. How many people use hallucinogens? Among people aged 12 or older in 2021, 2.6%, or about 7.4 million people, reported using hallucinogens in the past 12 months. Source: 2021 National Survey on Drug Use and Health. How many young students use hallucinogens? Among young people in 2022, an estimated 1.2% of 8th graders, 2.1% of 10th graders, and 4.4% of 12th graders reported using any hallucinogen in the past 12 months. An estimated 0.6% of 8th graders, 1.3% of 10th graders, and 2.5% of 12th graders reported using LSD in the past 12 months. An estimated 1% of 8th graders, 1.6% of 10th graders, and 3.4% of 12th graders reported using hallucinogens other than LSD in the past 12 months. An estimated 0.6% of 8th graders, 0.7% of 10th graders, and 1.4% of 12th graders reported using MDMA. An estimated 1.2% of 12th graders reported using ketamine in the past 12 months. An estimated 0.8% of 8th graders, 0.8% of 10th graders, and 0.8% of 12th graders reported using salvia in the past 12 months. Source: 2022 Monitoring the Future Survey. How many young adults use hallucinogens? Among young adults aged 19 to 30 in 2021, an estimated 8% reported using any hallucinogen, representing an all-time high since the category was first surveyed in 1988. Source: 2021 Monitoring the Future Panel Study Annual Report. How many people have a hallucinogen use disorder? Among people aged 12 or older in 2020, 0.2%, or about 493,000 people, had a hallucinogen use disorder in the past 12 months. Source: 2021 National Survey on Drug Use and Health. And just as a note, there were asterisks used. The first one was used in this bullet over here, where an estimated 8% reported using any hallucinogen, so that has one asterisk. And the single asterisk is defined, and it says, types of hallucinogens reported by participants in the National Survey on Drug Use and Health include DMT, AMT, Foxy, ketamine, LSD, MDMA, PCP, peyote/mescaline, psilocybin mushrooms, and Salvia divinorum. And as another note, DMT, AMT, and Foxy have slashes between them, so they seem to be related to the same drug. And then the second, which is two asterisks, is said to mean types of hallucinogens reported by individuals in the Monitoring the Future surveys included LSD, MDMA, mescaline, peyote, quote, shrooms, end quote, or psilocybin, and PCP. Next section. What are examples of psychedelic and Dissociative drugs. While many emerging and established substances are classified as psychedelic and dissociative drugs, NIDA-supported research mainly focuses on the following substances, which are more commonly used and/or are being investigated as potential medical treatments. While some debate remains on how to describe these drugs and how specific drugs are classified, researchers generally classify them according to how they work in the brain. Psychedelic drugs. Among other health effects, psychedelic drugs alter a person's perception of their surroundings. They can change a person's sense of self, their mood, and their perception of reality. Footnote 1, footnote 3, and footnote 10. Psilocybin is a chemical compound in certain types of mushrooms, also called, quote, shrooms, end quote, or, quote, magic mushrooms, end quote. Footnote 23. LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, or, quote, acid, end quote, is a clear or white, odorless, lab-made synthetic substance derived from chemicals in fungi that grow on rye and other grains. Footnote 69. DMT, dimethyltryptamine, is a chemical compound found in plants native to the Amazon rainforest. These plants are sometimes used to make a tea called ayahuasca. Footnote 70. Lab-made synthetic DMT is a white crystalline powder that is usually smoked. Footnote 71. Mescaline is a chemical compound found in peyote, a small cactus native to America's southwest and northern Mexico. Mescaline can also be lab-made, synthetic. Footnote 72. NBOMES, N-benzylphenethylamines, are lab-made synthetic chemical compounds originally developed for use in brain research. Footnote 73. They are sometimes sold as LSD, but are more potent with higher risk of adverse effects. Dissociative drugs. Among other health effects, dissociative drugs can also alter people's perception of reality. They also typically make people feel as if they are disconnected from their body and environment. Footnote 6. Ketamine is a strong compound used in prescription medications for anesthesia in humans and animals. It is also illegally manufactured as a liquid or off-white powder. Footnote 28. A derivative called esketamine is FDA approved for treatment-resistant depression. PCP, phencyclidine, is a synthetic chemical compound most commonly used as a liquid or white crystal powder. Footnote 40. Other. Researchers are also interested in the psychedelic and dissociative properties of other drugs. These include MDMA, 3,4-methyl-N-dioxymethamphetamine, also called, quote, Molly, end quote, or, quote, ecstasy, end quote, is a lab-made synthetic drug that has effects similar to stimulants like methamphetamine. Some researchers and organizations consider MDMA to be a psychedelic drug because it can also mildly alter visual and time perception. Footnote 7. Ibogaine is a chemical compound that comes from the bark of certain plants. These include the iboga shrub, which is used in religious rites in Western Africa. While ibogaine does have psychedelic properties, it affects a different spectrum of brain activity than psychedelic or dissociative drugs. Footnote 8. Salvia divinorum, is a plant common to southern Mexico and Central and South America. Salvia leaves are typically chewed, extracted as juices, smoked, or vaporized. Unlike psychedelic or dissociative drugs, it primarily activates kappa opioid receptors in the brain. Footnote 21. Next section. What is microdosing? Some people report, quote, microdosing, end quote, psychedelic drugs, typically LSD or psilocybin. Microdosing refers to regularly taking these drugs in very small amounts, typically 1/10 to 1/20th of a typical non-clinical dose. People report that they microdose to lessen mental health symptoms such as depression and stress, improve productivity, and ease pain. However, research to date has not established that microdosing is safe or effective. Footnote 22, footnote 74. Next section. Are psychedelic and dissociative drugs legal? While laws vary by specific substance, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, lists most psychedelic and dissociative drugs on the U.S. Schedule of Controlled Substances. However, the legal status of some of these drugs is evolving. Though most of these substances remain federally controlled, some states and the District of Columbia have decriminalized possession of psilocybin and some similar drugs, meaning there are no criminal penalties for possessing smaller amounts of the substance for personal use, or deprioritized enforcement of laws against the substance. Other jurisdictions are considering similar changes. Footnote 75. Learn more about psychedelic and dissociative drugs and their legal status in the United States from the DEA. And lastly, there's a section on more resources on psychedelic and dissociative drugs, and then there's a reference to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, and to browse consumer health information on psychedelic and dissociative drugs from Medline Plus. And then lastly, the references to each of the footnotes. All 75 of them. And it is dated April 2023.